Now it is time for a CNN reality check as Florence bears down on the Carolinas. A damning Washington Post editorial is calling President Trump, quote, complicit in this storm, not for failing to prepare, but for failing to address climate change. So senior political analyst John Avlon has more for us. What do you see, John?
That's right, Allie. Look, President Trump has been reaching for storm superlatives, as he is wont to do. The biggest, the worst, the most dangerous, and who can forget, tremendously wet. But while President Trump has been talking up our preparedness, his policies have been tearing down our defenses to climate change, which is often blamed for extreme weather. In fact, on the very same day Trump was discussing Florence from the Oval Office, his EPA proposed rolling back restrictions on emissions of methane, which is 25 times worse than carbon dioxide when it comes to climate change. And that's just the latest environmental policy targeted by the Trump administration. According to a July study from the New York Times, nearly 80 regulations could be on their way out. They include everything from no longer requiring chemical companies to report leaks, to cutting cars and trucks' fuel efficiency, pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, dismantling the Clean Power Plan, and opening nearly all our coastline to offshore drilling. It's so bad that according to two Harvard scientists, Trump's environmental policies could lead to an additional 80,000 unnecessary deaths every decade. Not convinced about the connection between climate change and extreme weather? Well, warmer water means more intense storms. And when President Trump called Hurricane Florence tremendously wet, he was actually onto something. The amount of precipitation in our worst storms increased nearly 20% between 1958 and 2007, according to one scientific study. And the relative number of these extreme storms is also up about 40% in that same period. But you don't need to be a tree hugger to recognize the cost of climate change. Here's a stat that will get the attention of even the most committed capitalist. The total cost of U.S. hurricanes this decade is more than $343 billion. That's with a B. And southern states, the heart of Trump's base, are the ones that have sustained the most damage and will likely face the greatest cost in the future. But just last month, the Richmond Fed released a report that found, quote, evidence that higher summer temperatures could reduce overall U.S. economic growth by as much as 1/3 over the next century, with southern states accounting for a disproportionate share of that potential reduction. And in 2012, North Carolina lawmakers passed a bill explicitly ignoring climate science, forcing officials to work from outdated predictions of sea level rise rather than the latest figures, which are more dire. Their stated motive? To boost development along the coast, which is exactly where Florence is headed. Short-term thinking isn't sufficient to deal with long-term problems. And here's a final stat that should get your attention. We found out late last month that the oldest ice in the Arctic is breaking up for the first time ever, in a development that one scientist simply called scary. This isn't rocket science, folks. It's climate science. And as long as we continue to aggressively ignore it, the cost in lives and dollars will only escalate. And that's your reality check.
John Avlon, that was really helpful. More precipitation we're seeing, and they're seeing that right now in the Carolinas. Thank you.